Christopher will share with us his vision about product development and product management from the point of view of course, managing innovation uh, from first-hand experience. He's an entrepreneur. He's also, by the way, student at the faculty. But here he's in his capacity of an entrepreneur with a very interesting global experience. Because although the company started um, with a kind of small scale plans, right? Right now, you're considered a global company. You work. You will tell us, but I think you work with all the continents, which
Correct.
is and you are based in Sofia. Yeah, you live for quite a while in Sofia, so
10 years
uh,
now.
thank you very much. Yes, again, and the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much for the invitation. And yes, to follow that, it's been now 10 years in Sofia, Bulgaria, and really the best country in the world. You're the best people in the world. I say that with all my heart, really. Love. I don't see how we could have done what we have done anywhere else either. We have had incredible opportunity to have a great team together. So I will very proudly show you some of what we've done in the beginning and then go into more general product development as we go through the session. So can I share my
Sure.
screen? Great. Can you see my screen?
I see your screen, but the first slide seems empty.
Good.
Yes?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, then I will start here with lecture on product development. Sorry, we're getting there. Okay, start with a joke. Right. So goals for today. We will, as we're talking about also product development, and it's a very wide topic that applies essentially to everything across the economy. We'll try to go wide and establish a framework and learn some useful concepts and models, and really from the applied perspective, what it's like, understanding it, some of the joys, some of the pains of product development. I hope you should find it interesting. I think an important part of this is also recognizing that product development is in a way a discipline of its own, and should be kind of treated in a dedicated way. And we'll come back to this as we go forward. Hopefully, if you don't already feel comfortable with product development, this should give you also some more of the deeper understanding of what's going on, that you're comfortable to dive deeper and get involved more on the topic. So again, see patterns, take notes for future, and I hope you enjoy it. So if there's anything, we will have a chance at the end also to come back and do a bit of a Q&A. So if you have any ideas, questions, things that come up as we go along, just keep a note and we can do that at the end. And maybe just to say as well, I appreciate the feedback as we go along. So if I say anything particularly interesting or you have a question as we go along, or feel free to jump in. Equally, if I'm boring you on a slide and you would like me to move on, feel free to unmute and yawn loudly. That also works. So, okay. So, as we said, product development is relevant to, well, that's pretty much every sector. If you see something not on there, let me know and we can add it. But you will see products in every field that you can imagine, and products need to be developed. Therefore, there is product development. So just essentially almost everything. Now, just in terms of my background, I've had some experience in different fields. Professor mentioned my experience, which I'll come back to, which is my current activity with Prosfit. Previous to that, I've worked in a number of different areas, including through consulting and other work. So I had some experience with product development in these different areas prior to this experience, which meant that I could pull it together and apply it more directly. So what I'm working in now are these orange bubbles: medical devices, software, and services, right? Which, as you see, are different to what I was working in before, but that same knowledge transfers across. So who am I? Just very quickly to get that out of the way. Christopher Hutchison. Again, thank you, Toto, for mentioning. Entrepreneur, I'm co-founder of CTO of Prosfit. We'll come to this in a moment. Essentially, we work in the field of prosthetics. So I myself, I'm a lower limb amputee. I was in an accident in 2009 when I was 17 years old, and had both legs amputated, one below the knee and one above the knee, which turns out is also helpful for product development. So we developed an end-to-end solution for the full socket specification process. So if you see on the prosthesis here, you have all the selection below this line, which are just standard components, right? The problem is this area above the line that needs to fit around the person's what's called residuum or stump or residual limb, right? The leg that's left. That has to be custom made because it's completely different for everyone, and it needs to fit them well. It has to distribute the pressure correctly. It has to be biomechanically correct. There are a lot of variables that go into making that right. So we had to develop a solution that made that possible. And we've done that. I can come back to this in a little bit more detail, but one important factor of this is it's a product that comes out of the end of this, which is a regulated medical device, and there are a lot of requirements related to that. But the product is also the overall process that arrives at that, and it's important to get the whole end-to-end solution correct. Right. So there you see the socket being assembled to a prosthesis. The software involved in this process is also software for medical device, which you see here, again, which is a regulated product. And the result being medical devices, which are regulated. We were the first to have prosthetic sockets regulated in the EU, produced by additive manufacturing, right? Custom made, regulated, ISO certified. Here you see some of our product range. And these became the foundation for service solutions, which I'll come back to. And again, these are things that happen, it's not just me, it's not just our team. All of this development happens with stakeholders, our team and suppliers, but also working very closely with our customers, understanding what they need and what needs were, what problems we're solving for them. And you'll see that sometimes the problem that you think you're solving doesn't turn out to be the problem that you needed to solve, and you need to figure out how to course correct for that. Equally, a stakeholder in this, and we'll come back to the question of money, is investors. You need to develop products in a way that you're also continuously able to show your investors that you're making clear progress in what you're doing. Right. So, prosthetics. Why are we in this field? So I mentioned I'm an amputee. That happened, and we were in Switzerland. I was very lucky. They saved my life, honestly. At the hospital there, I was clinically dead. So now this is my second chance. But we moved from being in an incredible hospital environment to a very strange environment that was full of plaster and dust and seemed like it was a few hundred years ago, which is not very reassuring when you're relying on these things to walk, have mobility, and live your life. So we thought, if this is what's happening in Switzerland, what's happening in the rest of the world? Unfortunately, well, around 3/4 of amputees have no access to prosthetics at all. Of the lucky 25% who do, 50% of them receive, and again, the challenging part here is typically the sockets that are just not comfortable, that are the wrong size, distribute the pressure in the wrong way, are physically painful to wear, and therefore you're not able to use them. The result is basically the same as not having received the service in the first place. So out of what's roughly somewhere between 20 and 35 million amputees, only an eighth, roughly 12.5% roughly, actually have prosthetics that suit them. This is a problem that is very frustrating because it's absolutely solvable, right? We're not talking about something very complicated, bionic, inserted into the human body, right? This is a very simple, right, in a way, solution that just is external to the body. They need to put on to replace the bit between the end of their leg and the floor, right? Pretty simple. The problem is continuing to grow. There are more amputees, and that was traditionally because of things like war, landmines, diseases, traffic accidents. Increasingly, though, that unfortunately, because now of diabetes and congestion, issues with the circulatory system. And that is something that unfortunately continues to grow as society is less healthy over time, honestly. At the same time, this process that exists for socket fitting, and you see here this plaster, you just can't scale it up to meet the demand. It's the bottleneck in the process, right? So here you see another example. This person here in this workshop is someone who, by necessity, has a 4-year degree, has many years of experience and apprenticeship before they're at a point that they're able to do this at all. And when you have such a limited resource and working in a very complicated environment, it doesn't really work. So we understood that problem had to be solved with completely different thinking. It needed a new technology solution, and here we come from the product side, but also how the product and the process, the end-to-end solution all come together to deliver an outcome which is beyond just the product itself. So what we see is, with the traditional process where there was a 50% success rate, by removing all of the dirtiness out of the process and making it more objective, more accurate, etc., we've so far been achieving a 90% plus successful first-time fit. That's unheard of in the field of prosthetics. And we just validated that, thankfully, with a project in Bulgaria as well here, working with Toyota Mobility Foundation, who supported us to provide 50 prosthetics for amputees here. And again, with a success that outperformed what were considered to be a group of already comfortable, satisfied users. So, okay, and we collected a lot of data, very interesting process at the same time. We see massive productivity gains because it takes 2 hours to fit someone instead of 10 to 20 hours. It's more cost effective than traditional solutions. It's very easy to scale. We've been able to do this completely globally, centralized from Sofia, because our customers right now include in Kenya, Rwanda, Australia, Singapore. We're currently working with the largest hospital. Canada, we're working with the largest hospital in one of the provinces. We're moving into the US market at the moment. Yeah, all continents right now. So we've been able to do this because of how we structured our solution, how we structured the product. One of the major things, because this is custom made, was we had to understand how to create a footprint where we could provide support in a centralized way and also manufacture in a way that was as close to the customer as possible. And we may come back to that, but basically we developed a strategy of certifying existing manufacturing sites to produce in a way that met our needs. That means that we're able to achieve a 3-day turnaround time on every continent today. So, okay, and as part of that and this whole process, we actually have data, and we're able to leverage that data. And this is something that I'm working on quite intensively now, which is the whole machine learning side of things. But we're able to do that. As you can imagine, it was very difficult to do that in a plaster environment, so nothing ever really improved or progressed. So, okay, that's the background. Again, solution, products, software, able to deliver the full limb means we're able to basically, instead of needing that whole complicated workshop and dirty environment, well, you just need a relatively trained person to sit in a room with the right software, laptop, scanner, some parallel bars, and suddenly they're able to become a prosthetic clinic. So instead of having to invest $500,000 in a location, you can invest almost nothing. So you can set it up anywhere. You can even make it mobile. And here we're collaborating with Toyota to actually make mobile Panda points that can go out. This is part of what we did in Bulgaria, which was proving that you could, instead of bringing a person with no legs, forcing them to figure out how to come to your clinic that's, you know, only in Sofia or in one of the central cities, well, actually just go and provide the service to them at their home. Then they can get mobile, then they can start moving out and going to places. So that means, and I won't touch upon it too much detail here, but we've also been working with, for example, the Rwandan government for how can we use this to actually meet the capacity needs of the entire country? Because in a country where you have 25,000 amputees and 3 people who are trained to provide them services, you need to think of a new solution. So again, here we are. These are all the countries where we've been providing prosthetics so far. And, you know, apart from anything else in the products, it's also very satisfying when you get to see the impact that these have on people's lives. So here you see some of the testimonies. And here you some of the awards, and our special shout out also to the we received the ARC Fund Innovative Company or Innovative Enterprise of the Year award, which you see here. Met with the president, and that maybe we'll come back to in Q&A. These are very important, as an aside, also in providing some additional kind of support for the team, validating internationally that we're also, let's say, what we're doing is respected locally within the ecosystem, and vice versa. So it's quite an interesting topic of these role. We can come back to that. So I'm now going to jump into product development. If anyone would like a break there, I will just take a sip of water and let you read this very quickly. Now, I'm going to throw some quite abstract concepts at you. There's a number of things. It might seem a little bit prohibitive all in one go. And there's this fable of the centipede, which was the frog asking the centipede, you know, how are you able to move all of your legs and figure out which leg you need to move at a time to walk forward? And the centipede said, Jesus, I never thought about it. And the moment he started to think about it, he was unable to step forward and fell off the branch. So I will just warn you, don't think that this got overcomplicated. Don't worry about it. I hope this will kind of sink in, you know, make some notes for what you find relevant to you, sleep on it, and it will all make sense. Don't over question your ability to move one leg in front of the other. All right, this is all quite common sense stuff in the end. So why product development? Well, for a company to exist, you need to have a product and sell it. That might seem relatively obvious. Whether that's a product or a service, your business needs to revolve around something. Now, what that will start with is making products out of money. You will have an investment stage, and that's something that, like in the startup environment, the first few years of your company may be taking investor money to make products out of money, and make products out of money. We'll come back to this. However, you do need to transition across to making money out of products. Right. Now, a lot of people will consider that making products out of money is all that product development is. I will just warn you that that is part of it, but that's not all of it, because successful product development means that you make it over here, right? And so we will use this framework to have a little look at how that works in theory and in practice. So making it across from one end to the other is basically fundamental to business, and that is your product. So coming from the conception, the idea, the product design engineering, again, we'll come back to this in more detail, you need to get it to the point where you're able to provide sales and customer support and get feedback into the product. Product development is that entire loop, right? Product development includes getting to a point where you're getting feedback that continuously improves the product that you're developing, that you're taking on board the knowledge, the experience that you're getting. And equally, if you're doing things right, that the revenue and investment that you're making out of these products then feeds back into your budget for the continuous development, right? This is product development. So essentially, it's like the engine of your business. So it's critical to the business and as a startup, your entrepreneurial success, because you live and die by the product ultimately. It requires knowledge across the business and the outside world. We'll come back to this. That's your personal knowledge. That means your team knowledge. So you need to be working within a team that has complementary knowledge and within the community and network around you. You can't possibly know everything by yourself. Your team, especially at the beginning, can't possibly know everything by itself. You need to be able to fill in the pieces, the gaps with experts, various people around you in your network, right? I will tell you, apart from the results of this, it's also personally very rewarding product development and fulfilling, because you get to see an idea turn into something real. You get to see the results of it. You get to see the improvement. You get to see how it impacts people's lives. The whole process is very satisfying. So I'll just give a sneak peek, but this is basically what we're looking at. And this is something that ties the kind of the theory of getting from the making products out of money to making money out of products. There's a step-by-step process that basically comes through from the initial concept stage, where you then actually figure out what that needs to achieve. You're able to go through some prototyping to get an alpha. You'll go through product testing and iteration until you've got a beta model. At that point, it needs to be verified and validated, and you can start this process earlier, but you basically need to know that what you're doing actually meets the needs of your customers, right? And meets the expectations in terms of, like, if my product needs to be structurally able to withhold a weight of 100 kilos, can it do that, right? All of these things you really need to verify and validate before you have a solution that you can bring to market, right? The first thing you bring to market is not going to be perfect, but it has to be good enough. It has to be to a point where it provides benefits and doesn't create risk. That's the flip side. So once you have that product, you're then engaged in what's called post-market surveillance, which is making sure that, yes, your product that was supposed to withhold 100 kilos does withhold 100 kilos, and you don't have a bunch of people calling you saying, hey, I stood on your product and it broke, right? There are lots of important factors like that, right? And this comes then to the sales and customer support and feedback. So where does this whole process take place? So within your company, I will show this model in a second, but you have areas, commercial, technical, and operational, and all of these are involved in product development. So what are the roles and responsibilities, and what's the kind of real world context for how this is happening, right? Let me know, am I speaking at a reasonable pace, by the way? Is this okay as I'm going forward?
Yes, don't worry. It's perfect.
Okay. Thank you. So imagine your company is entirely enclosed in these three circles, right? And again, I know this sounds a bit abstract, but I promise you this is almost entirely correct. And if you can find any holes in this argument, please let me know, right? Within your organization, your company, you have a commercial side, right? This is everything that has to do with sales, customer interaction, etc. You also have a technology side, which is developing the technology, IT systems, all of these things, which also to some extent overlaps with operations, which is, you know, all the operational, administrative, regulatory, logistics, etc. All of this is your company, right? And yes, these things do overlap as well, right? In principle, the overlapping section, if we're to talk proportionally, might be bigger, but just for the sake of visualization, let's go like this. So beyond this and within it, to some extent, is the outside world. So your company is not operating in a vacuum. It has to interact with the world around it, right? So there are all sorts of different constraints that are involved in this, right? So in the center of this process, the person or the team that has to have the full kind of control over what is happening here on all angles of the company has to be the CEO, and ideally also the management team. Now, the commercial side, like you have here, sales, marketing, etc., a technology, more R&D platform. The overlap might be things like how is support provided technically. On the operations side, you have all logistics, admin, etc. And then you have overlaps like manufacturing and IT, and then customer training, etc. So you need some kind of split of responsibility within your team that is able to handle all of these areas. And at the same time, your CEO management has to retain the control of that overall process. So, question, where is product development in this? And what does your company look like? So let's just deal with that from the perspective of a startup company and how it grows. Now, within the field of entrepreneurship, you have a lot of overlap, right? Your initial team probably have to be kind of a generalist, right? You need to understand enough about all of the fields that you're able to operate and get things going. Your specific commercial or operational or technical knowledge may be more limited because as a team you don't have the resource yet to go and hire the best experts in each field, etc., etc. So you're operating in a world that's much more overlapped conceptually. In a big corporate, there are very few people in the management team who have that top-down view. There are a lot of people who have specialized in the commercial area or the technical or the operational, but the distance between their areas is much greater, and the probability that they actually know what each other is doing is much lower, right? In a big corporate, like we're working with big corporates now, it's clear that honestly, the commercial guys in many cases have never met the technology or the operations guys, right? Or maybe met once at a Christmas party, right? So the challenges that you're dealing with in terms of product development when you're here versus when you're here are actually slightly different. So what you'll see is that as you kind of grow in your product development experience, the challenges that you're dealing with do change over time, right? But at the same time, you have your internal context, which is what we discussed, and the external context, which is the world around you that you come into contact with, right? So for your business, it doesn't matter necessarily some abstract thing that's happening at the other end of the world. But if it's something that is somehow related to your business, you better know about it, right? The more you know about it, the more knowledge is within this area and is seen by your team and understood by your team, the better your product development will be, right? The big risk here, and I will just put it like this, is you don't know what you don't know, right? So it is these risk factors that, oh, I didn't know that I didn't know that, that can absolutely destroy your product development and potentially your business, right? So to de-risk that, you better know everything you can. And I will just give a very specific, concrete example here. And these are all sorts of needs here. I will take one context, which is in the external context, right? So you need to know, for example, what are the market dynamics in your market? What are the technologies that are available that you can apply to your product development? Maybe let you just take that in for 1 second. You have to be aware of these things, right? So for a specific example, in the field that we're in as a medical device supplier, if we had been aware of all of these things, but not known that we were in a regulatory, regulated field where our products need to be regulated medical devices that meet certain needs, I might be in jail right now, right? So it's very important, the devil's in the detail. You need to know what you're doing, right? So again, when you're involved in product development, a massive discovery process is very helpful, right? Just learn everything you can about anything that connects with your business and your product in any way. All of that information is going to be helpful for you. Right. So where does product development fit in this? Who is responsible for it? Well, it's a good question. Now, when we're talking about different types of companies, let's imagine a technology company, the lead of the product development, and this was, in my case, basically how it has worked for our company. It's come from the technology side. We needed to develop a massive technology solution. The CTO, myself, was responsible for product development and leading it. However, like you see here, the CTO isn't somewhere out on the margins of technology. The CTO has to be connected with also fundamentally understanding the big picture, the commercial needs, the operational needs, right? You can't develop a technology that you can't actually supply within the marketplace and that nobody's interested in, right? You need to know all of these things. So a technology company, it might be the CTO leading it, right? If it's a very like social media sales oriented company, then it would be pretty reasonable for the chief marketing manager or the chief commercial or chief sales officer to be responsible for product development, right? In a kind of consumer company. Now, equally, if it's a very industrial operations based company and it's like, you know, various forms of steel shipment or something like this, well, the chief operations officer might actually be the best place to engage and lead the product development effort, right? I would, however, make the argument that as we gain a kind of more fine-tuned understanding of product development and business over time, I think there is a role for what I'll call here a chief product officer who actually has to have the full overview of everything. And this is a person then who would also be within the C-suite, right? The central core here, who would be underneath and operating, directly responsible to the CEO, right? So this is your core team here who are responsible for product development. So that's the lead person here. Now, where does the core team come in? Well, again, you as an individual can't know everything about the product and the company that you're developing. You do actually need at least a team of people. And the chances are your core team equally, yes, will involve experts who are the people who are very focused out on the margins, but you need to have a reasonable group of people who you can call on who have some idea of the big picture, right? Again, I don't want to go into too much detail, but these are things we can come back to if you're interested in Q&A. So that core team does need the expert advice from within your company, but also outside of your company, right? So you need this sort of collaborative team and network that you're also able to call upon. So right, as we were developing Prosfit and developing solutions for prosthetics in an area that we were not like familiar with the academic context of how it was taught, we hadn't inhabited in the clinics. We had to go and meet these people and spend as much time as possible, understand how it worked, what was their perspective, what were the pros and cons with what they were dealing with, what were their major challenges, etc. Right. And again, that's your collaborative environment, but still you need to have a general understanding of things that are going on beyond that. Right. So multifunctional teams, very important. You need a culture of collaborating together. That is really critical for product development. And you need to figure out a way to preserve that knowledge that you're gathering. This is a separate and also quite complex topic, but a very interesting one. That's something that will start quite simple when you're a small team, and then usually will tend to become more rigid, and you might have internal company Wikipedia style things, to use an example. That is a way to kind of formalize your company's knowledge and share it internally within the team. There is a conflict here, I will just say, between collaboration and human insecurity, right? And this is an important factor here. So when you're talking about product development and collaboration, everyone has to feel comfortable that they're able to share their knowledge, that they're able to participate in this collaborative team, and that sharing their knowledge with someone else doesn't remove their own value, right? This is something that unfortunately we've seen in 1 or 2 cases, and we've had to make some decisions also. Unfortunately, you know, it's not something that you enjoy as a manager, but we've had to let some people go in the team over time because they felt very insecure and they didn't want to share something because they were worried that if they gave that piece of information away that they would then be fired because they were no longer useful, right? So you need to create an environment where people know and trust and understand the dynamic of collaboration of what's going on here, and that you're all really in this together, right? That's really important. So I will take a break here 1 second, let everyone take a breather. Okay. So that's the more or less the context for this. So how does product development actually work? Well, on the commercial side, what is the need, right? This might seem like a very obvious thing, but you'd be amazed how many people develop a product without actually asking this question, right? What is the need? From that question, well, what is the solution, right? From a technology perspective, can you create a product that meets the need that has been identified, right? We think we have an idea for how that solution could look. Well, can we supply it? Is that something that is legal? Can we, from an you know, there are all sorts of considerations here, right? Can we supply that to the customer in a way that is regulated, meets their expectations, etc.? Does it meet that need? Here you have your 3 circles and what is basically a cycle around them, right? This doesn't only happen once. Again, this cycle is a very important one. If I could ask you to commit anything to your memory from this session, this would be a good one, right? Feel free to screenshot it if you like. Right, so from the sales side, can we sell it? Is there a need, right? This is the beginning of the linear process. Can we create a solution? Can we supply it? And again, this is the end of the cycle, which is the sales, right? Do you see how these 2 things connect? So this cyclical process that happens here, which honestly happens a few times as part of the development process, is in a sense equivalent to this linear story of starting over here, making products out of money, and then getting to the end of the process where, yeah, we figured out what the need is, we figured out what the solution is, we figured out how to supply it. Now we're back up here finally and we're selling it, right? Is this clear? I will take silence as a yes. I assume everyone's nodding. Cool. So this combination of linear and cyclic thinking, and again, I don't want to get too abstract here, but it's important, it might be reassuring to understand this when you're engaging in product development, right? It's not just a linear process of we did a thing, it got slightly better, then we sold it, right? There is an iterative process that is involved in this. So the traditional thinking was this linear, and yeah, there is some truth to that, right? This is something that was viewed as like the waterfall approach, right? It has also stood the test of time. It's thinking that does make sense, right? That was more geared towards engineering thinking, if I could put it like that. You understood that there was a certain type of machine that needed to be made. You planned it, you designed it, you built it, you tested to see if it met the requirements, you produced it. There we go, it's out the door, right? That became a little bit more nuanced because of software, actually, primarily, other elements as well. But the world of software was different to engineering hardware products and things of that nature, because you could actually iterate a lot more easily, right? So instead of viewing things from a, yeah, we do it, we get it right, then we move on to the next step, software and the product development life cycle was slightly different. It meant that you could get something out there, see the reaction to it, build a minimum viable product. No, I didn't like that, let's come back. You know, the cost of getting something wrong in software, quote unquote, is lower, right? I will tell you now, with software development salaries, that is also changing. But at least in theory, it's much cheaper to make a mistake in a software product than it is on, you know, a turbine for a dam, for example, right? So the thinking that is involved in it, paradoxically, has just been slightly different. What that has meant is that we're able to take this whole product development thinking and say, if we take a step back and look at it again as the big picture, what is really the best way to approach that? Is it what was, you know, the software and trial and error, and by the way, also elements of like tinkering with something could break something over here, so you do need to go through a lot of iterations. It's a more complex system, right? How do we bring these types of thinking together? And well, the reality is that the truth of product development is somewhere in between these two things, right? And I will try to describe it, and this was my own kind of thought of how to describe it here, as a sort of guided iteration is what you're looking for, right? Your cycles, this going around the process, is a sort of agile, speed-based, trying to maximize the learning and continuous improvement that you're making on a weekly or bi-weekly or daily basis, however you measure that, right? But you can't just be going off in any random direction, right? You do need a sense of that direction, which in many ways is what the waterfall linear thinking delivered, right? So the idea of having a structure to what you're doing, testing, having an end goal in mind as to where you think you're going, and again, that might change over time, but you need a target if you're gonna have, if you want to figure out how to get good at archery, right? You need to understand where you're going to arrive at that. So by combining the thinking from both of these things, you actually have the most true to reality model of how product development, at least in my experience, works, right? And most effectively, this is what we're talking about, is continuous improvement towards a goal. And I will just symbolically show this shell in a completely abstract way that if anyone can figure out why I put it there, let's discuss it in the Q&A. Right, so iterative improvement cycles. This is not a new thing. This is a type of thinking that exists in many fields, right? So when you're talking about quality assurance, whether that's related to, you know, traditional products like, you know, a component for a car, there's what's called the plan, do, check, act loop. So you plan something, you do it, you check if it works, and you react accordingly. That also works for software and all areas where there's quality assurance, including services, etc. Right? Very similar to what was called OODA loop, shown a little bit more complex here. That was developed in the, I believe, in the 50s in the context of warfare, unfortunately. Right? So how do you understand the situation, orient yourself, decide what to do, act, and then see what happens, start again, right? You'll see that this is almost exactly the same to what has, again, become new and sexy, which was the lean. This is all exactly the same thing, right, effectively. So these are just patterns that are designed for continuous improvement, right? And again, this is crucial to product development because you need to be improving your product to converge to a point where you have achieved a product that you can sell. So again, traditional approach for product development theory, some sort of linear approach like this. Pragmatic modern approach, as I described there, product development reality looks something like this. Right? So the reason this looks like this is at the beginning, what you see here are these iterative loops. You're stepping out of the 2D here, going into some 3D, trying to figure out the commercial needs, the technology needs, what exactly. This is an iterative process. And honestly, at the beginning of product development, it could be quite messy, right? Because you don't know what you don't know yet, you know, so you're still trying to figure out, you're still doing like pathfinding, right? You're still running off into the Amazon, hoping that you find something interesting that you can come back with, right? Elements like this. Once you've figured out the lay of the land and you understand a lot more what the requirements are, what the variables are, what risks and factors to take into account, your iterative process becomes a lot more structured, clear, consistent, like you see in the middle of this here. And then ultimately, you know, the end of the process, your release, you know, to the market looks very similar in a sense to the linear process, but the whole way to get there, you know, involves this iterative. So again, this guided iteration. We're starting over here. We're going through this commercial, technical, operational loop in all sorts of ways, trying to figure out what we don't know, understand them, you know, really start to organize what we're doing, make sure we're developing correctly, making sure we identify what we need to do. I will come back to this. All of this iteratively, right? So that iteration also means that you understand that you're going to make mistakes, right? You're going to start doing something that you are going to realize that it's the wrong path. You need to be able to confidently cut that path and continue it and understand that's part of your iterative development. It's not something that invalidates your linear development, right? Does that make sense? So, okay. Making products out of money to making money out of products. Again, in this messy world, what's still true is that the knowledge and experience and the establishment, by which I mean the seriousness by which people take your products because they understand that you're now an established player, feeds back. And it doesn't just feed back from when you sell it and you get it, or else you've got a lot of learning here that's not very well informed. That knowledge, experience, and establishment has to continuously happen as well. So when you're figuring out what you think you need to do, you're not just doing that in a vacuum and a void. You're actually going to the extent that you can and sort of checking that information with potential customers. Again, you might not want to be completely transparent about what your solution looks like, but you really want to understand the problem and if some of your thoughts or the things you think are important are actually the case, right? At the same time, the revenue and investment doesn't just come from the end of that process, because we talked about investor stakeholders. You start at the beginning, you get investment, but you need to show results, because the chances are you might need either some more investment here, or you're going to need more budget to be approved so that you can continue, right? So you might need to show results here, show more results. Again, we'll come back to this maps to like the alpha, beta, MVP process, right? You need to plan and justify budget allocations, so revenue and investment. So if we're back to linear, and I will just pick up the pace slightly because I want to keep us within a good time. That initial stage is understanding what needs to be done. Product design, inputs and outputs. Again, this is not a completely fixed thing, but this is the first step, right? So for our sockets, a very important factor is, well, what does a socket actually need to achieve, right? So it needs to be comfortable. That's one element. And so we need to arrive at a solution that would allow a socket to become comfortable. And that is something that we needed to develop a software solution for. We needed to develop a scan to print solution so that someone could achieve that. Another input or output requirement is it needed to be strong enough, right? So what that means is someone has to be able to walk on it for at least 3 years on a daily basis, and they might be 100 or 125 kilos. So can it structurally meet those requirements, right? From understanding what those requirements are, the output in the input and output process is also saying, well, if we understand what the general need is, how could we test if we've achieved that or not? So it's more complicated on the, understanding if you've got a solution that would enable a comfortable fit, right? You need to go through that loop, and I can come back to that one. It's more complex. But if we just take the needing to achieve something that someone can wear that's 100 kilos, well, actually, a lot of these things in terms of the requirements here do get defined from a regulatory perspective. So, and we can come back to this, but regulatory is very important, because instead of reinventing what you need to do, you can say, oh, I'm inventing a food product. What requirements does a food product need to meet so that I can sell a food product in Europe? Well, it turns out they've documented that pretty thoroughly, and you can go and read that, right? So if you need to meet a need, like the food that I give someone doesn't kill them, right? You don't need to figure out and invent an experiment for that. You will actually go and find in the regulatory and in the ISO documents and these things, when you need to figure out product safety, when you need to figure out that either a product is strong enough or a food is safe, well, that's the type of test that you need to do. These are the types of results that you need to achieve from that test to tick that your product meets the requirements, right? So it's very helpful to create this sort of framework of what does my product need to achieve? How do I know that it achieves them, right? Critical, right? That then gives you this guidance for what you're actually trying to achieve with your prototyping and engineering, right? Again, these are cyclical processes. I'm just showing them here linear to make it easier to explain, right? Once you've got some initial solution that does meet at least the important requirements, you could call that an alpha product. You think it's met that, right? You at that point say, okay, I think it's met the needs, but let me go and make sure that it's met the needs, right? So for example, in our field, we had to figure out what products we worked with, what kind of, materials we worked with. We identified what kind of product strength we needed. We didn't want to have to test entire samples because that type of testing is a lot more expensive. So we knew that the material had to achieve a certain performance. So we started just testing little material samples because it was much cheaper until we figured out a material that worked, right? Then we say, we met the requirements. Now we're going to go and test with a big sample. We've figured out the material we want to use for the beta product. Now we think we've met the requirements. We're going to go and do the final verification validation. Now let's ship the whole product, see if it does meet the full ISO test. Now we have a full product. Let's ship that to a few validated customers to check that they're happy with how it performs, etc., etc. Right. I won't go into too much detail. You get the idea, right? That then gives you, once you've gone through that process, hopefully what will be a validated beta product, which we can call a minimum viable product. So maybe this doesn't meet every single product design input that you had identified. Maybe it's not the most pretty thing in the world, right? Or you weren't able to Wi-Fi connect it or something like this, but it met enough of the requirements for the performance of it that it stands alone as a product, and you de-risked any of the major risks that could make it dangerous, right? At that point, you're in a position that you can bring it to market and it becomes a product. Congratulations, right? Again, at that point, you've now let your child off into the wider world, and you want to make sure that they're doing okay. You want to make sure that that product that you thought was strong enough doesn't keep breaking every time someone tries it, right? So you need to have a very close eye, post-market surveillance, right, on the products that are out there. And in many cases, we have a regulatory requirement to have a post-market surveillance system, right? At that point, you then have the product out on the market. Congratulations, it's a product. Now you can start again with a new product, right, if you have to. So from the beginning, what's the product's idea? What defines the product success? How do you test it? Are you achieving that product success? If you have done that with all your iterations, great, you've got a final product design. Make sure that that design does meet all the requirements you have. Get it out there, sell it, and confirm that the product is successful in the real world, right? And again, success is not just technical success. I will come back to here again. Success is commercial, technical, and operational success. So if you have a great product and you're able to supply it, but no one is interested to buy it, that is not a successful product, right? Equally, if everyone loves it, but when they use it, they break it, it's not successful. If it technically works, everyone loves it, but you operationally can't get it to the customer, also not a successful product, right? So you need to tick commercial, technical, and operational boxes for success here, right? That gives you learning and earning for your next product, right? So I don't want to go too deep in the worms. I know we've done almost an hour here and I've done a lot of talking, but I will just give you, again, is it desirable, feasible, and viable? This is what that means. You can read that on the screen. Does it meet the commercial needs? Can you produce it and cost viably? And can you deliver it in a way that is legal? That needs to be tested and proved. This is like scientific method, essentially, during the product development. And that whole process means you have to be able to answer many questions. So I won't go into this. Is more operationally at the beginning here. This is the checkbox, the list of things that takes you through the process that we described, right? So what's the concept? It should meet this need. Who's the user? And by the way, there's a difference between who's the user and who's the customer, and even between who's the customer and who's paying for it. So understand these dynamics. Sometimes you think that your product is geared towards the user, like our product is for the amputee who wears the product. Our customer is the clinic and the professional who provides that product. The person who pays for it is actually the reimbursement system or the insurance. So if your product development is targeting something that is sexy for the user, actually you might not be successful because the customer who's responsible to buy the product and give it to the user doesn't like it, right? For some reason, which could include that maybe they feel threatened because now there's a whole new product that maybe means that they're not so important, right? So you need to understand what the customer needs are, not just the user needs. And going upstream, the payer, we figured that out, which is even if the customer loves what you do, you also have to convince the person who's paying for it, right? And sometimes the other way around, the customer might not be so happy to do it, but you go upstream to the insurance guys and you say, hey, I have a product that at scale is going to save you $1 million a month and your outcomes are going to be better. Where should we start? And then they force the customers to take it, right? So there are a lot of variables here. So what's the context? What should it achieve? What are the selling points that are important? And what are the risk factors? Again, then market price, how much is it going to cost? I don't want to get into the details right now. We can also come back in Q&A, but you need to develop a product which is cheaper than what you can sell it for, right? That might be self-evident, but that is a very important thing to think about from the beginning, because whatever the difference between the product cost and what you can sell it for is your margin. And out of that margin, with the volume, you also have to pay off your other fixed costs, right? That we can come back to. So who's going to pay for it? Who's going to pay how much? What's your cost compared to the price, right? By the way, if any of this would be helpful, I can also circulate the details here. So these are hypotheses that you're creating, right? And then as you go through the development process, you're basically confirming that your hypotheses are correct, right? Some of these things might need also go, no-go decisions. You're going to need to document these things. You might, for the sake of your budgeting process, figure out that this is what you want to develop as a product, but if you can't figure out any way to develop it for less than the market price of it, you're just going to have to stop at that point. There's no reason to continue developing the product at that time, right? So just as a staircase model, that's the same linear process that we're talking about. You are here at the beginning, you're sketching out, right? As you move forward, you're filling in increasing detail, but you also need to realize if you put the eyebrow at the wrong position and the wrong angle, you wasted a lot of time if you spent all of your time drawing this eyebrow perfectly here when you realize that actually you put it in the wrong place, right? So make sure that you are building these things together and going forward, right? you want to get from here to the product. Again, this is what that looks like. We come back to the same model. It's like plan, do, check, act, right? Learn, build, measure, learn, build, measure, learn, build, measure. It's the same it's like a nested fractal process going from the beginning to end. So in practice, yeah, it's a sketching, adding detail. It is kind of like a fractal process. It's very cyclical because you're iterating and you're starting with the wide strokes and adding more detail, taking a wrong path out, picking the right path and adding more detail there, right? It's collaborative. It involves everyone. You need good processes. You need good project management. You have to document things so that you can go back to what you're doing. So here, Agile is a pretty good framework, to be honest, for this. And you need to make sure that you're meeting these regulatory requirements, right? So I would just very, very quickly, regulatory requirements, to give you an idea, this is from the medical device old one, standards, where you will see the regulatory guys don't necessarily have so much focus on the outcome having a massive amount of benefits. But as you see here, what we're talking about in majority sense is making sure that you have a product that does not create risk for the individual who's using it. So in your whole product development process, remember you're talking about upside, great, sexy product that meets the needs of the user and the customer and the payer, but it also has to be safe. So you have that side, and you can use the regulatory to make sure that you're ticking all the boxes correctly and to trigger your thoughts about the right things you need to look for, right? So this is a framework that you can also use as part of your product development. So like product strength, I mentioned before, it must be strong enough. That's a requirement. Well, how do we test that? We plan a test, which is this, 3 million cycle test. We verify that, yes, does that correlate to, you know, real life use case? Well, the ISO says it is. That's been around for a long time. So yes, we have a pretty high certainty that that works. But we might want to also examine are there edge cases that are not considered but that are important for us to verify, right? So at that point, you can start designing the product, selecting the materials and testing them, doing everything that you need to do towards meeting that requirement, right? And ultimately, the product must pass this test validation. That product, when it gets shipped to a testing house somewhere in a very trusted location, when they do the test, it has to actually meet the objective that you set for the product. Same software. If you want it to do something when you click a button, how do you test for that? Like, does a pixel value change? Is that the right approach to it? When you design it and you do that test, does it do what you expect it to do, right? Same in software QA, exactly the same. So again, linear, you saw that, linear approach, and we can simplify, come back to that, but we know what it looks like. It's more like this in reality. So I ask you to be able to hold that to the extent that you can in your brain. And if you would like me to provide any slides or you want to screenshot anything like this, just feel free to do it, right? What we see is, yes, we've moved beyond just pure product development theory. And again, this is informed by the process that has arrived at all of these things, from an end-to-end solution to products, to software, to a full service solution, which right now has been rolled out in Africa, in Bulgaria and in Canada, and we're currently working towards in the US. Full nationwide solution. Again, our customer was no longer the user of the device. Now the customer is the government of the country who's rolling out our system. And this has been, in a sense, validated and verified by the fact that we have fit users, we have customers all over the world, and we're continuing to grow internationally at every level. So I hope that you take what I said of product development as seriously and coming from a well-informed place. I hope we met the goals, right? Establish a framework, some useful concepts and models, hopefully. I hope that did help your understanding of product development, that you see that it is a discipline that you can actually become specialized in, right? Specialized, but you need to be a very multidisciplinary person. You could become a chief product officer, right? So I hope at least between all the abstraction, everything, it does help you feel a bit more comfortable, and that you're interested to dive deeper. You start to see what's going on, and you might have some useful notes to go forward. I don't know. I hope that you also enjoyed it. So I will end there. Congratulations, you made it to the end, just over an hour. Thank you. I have to say it's a little bit strange doing this just directly to a computer, so I hope you were engaged with it and weren't just bored by what I was saying. But congratulations, we made it to the end. So thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to open up to Q&A discussion, anything with the remaining time that we have left. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And now, yeah, Elena is saying that it was a brilliant presentation. Elena, you can take the floor and say it out loud to all, and then maybe ask questions, comments.
Hello. Yes, I just wanted to say that was really brilliant. Like really, thank you for all the information. A lot of food of thought. So if it's possible to have your presentation, that would be great. If not, sure. Just my notes. But it was really productive. It was really, really interesting. Thank you so much, Chris.
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate it. I'd be happy. I mean, I don't know what the standard practice is, but in line with what I was saying about the, being willing within a collaborative environment to share and not feel insecure about it, I'm more than happy to share the presentation. So
the open innovation and yes, the
exactly,
transfer of know-how from business to academia. Also, yeah. Yeah, you'll send the presentation to me and I'll share with the students. Okay, за тези от вас, които биха искали да попитат въпрос на български, аз ще го преведа на английски. Крис също малко разбира български, малко да.
Да.
Because some of the students are not quite comfortable with speaking in English, but they might have a question in Bulgarian. Така че можете да зададете въпроси на български. Заповядайте.
And in light of that, by the way, sorry, I hope I was speaking not too quickly also for...
Okay. That's part of... there is a big debate. Okay, there is a question. How do you work with the governments of the countries where you distribute your product?
That's a good question. So there are different levels of interaction with the government that we have in different countries. So we're based in Sofia, Bulgaria. So first of all, our interaction with the Bulgarian government is that we're located here as a regulated medical device manufacturer, which means that we have a very strict regulatory requirement that we need to meet and prove to the BDA. It's the Bulgarian Drug and Medical Device Agency. We also had to, by that, show the reimbursement system that exists in the country that our products met the needs of the reimbursement system for an equivalent product. Right. In other countries in Europe, by virtue of the fact that we've done that in Bulgaria, means we've met the regulatory requirement. But it doesn't mean that we have always met the reimbursement requirement. And that is a challenge, right? So in some countries, we were able to directly say to the government, like, congratulations, here's our file. We're now going to be selling. Thank you. We'll let you know if anything breaks because we have a requirement for that. And that's fine. in other countries, and particularly in our case where we're launching an innovative product that was different fundamentally in the process and engineering and everything compared to the existing, they said, oh, we're not entirely sure that your product meets our requirements for the reimbursement. So we had to then go through quite a long process, in some cases, like with the French government, to convince them that actually the product meets the requirements of the reimbursement system and therefore should be reimbursed. And I will say that we have understood that that is not a consistent process in any way across Europe, right? Interestingly, even some things that, for example, are under the responsibility of the Ministry of Health are under the responsibility of the Ministry of Social Affairs or in a different country. And so actually you have to figure out who the right stakeholders are. And to be honest, I mean, we're all human. You actually do have to network at a human level with enough people until you figure out actually what the pathway is. Because typically, often governments won't make it obvious what you have to do for administrative processes, especially if they're not done that very often, or business has already influenced them in not wanting to make it too easy to engage in the process, right? I need to be careful with what I say there, but there are elements of these things, right? The medical device regulation used to be 60 pages, now it's 300 pages. Why is that? Is it purely because of human safety? Maybe. Is it because businesses have influenced government structures to have a much more demanding framework for regulations so that it's harder for new companies to compete against them? Yes. Honestly, probably yes.
Most probably that has a higher explanation power than the first factor. That's always the case in other sectors as well.
Mm.
Yeah.
True. So when you're interacting with governments, if you're a small startup or entrepreneurial company, to be honest, it's more challenging, and you do have to appeal at some level more to the human level and individual peoples who are trying to do the right thing and do things correctly. I think once you're above a certain size and you have above a certain budget and various budgeting allocation mechanisms, that maybe becomes slightly different. I won't say anything more on that. And I don't want to touch that subject. In terms of how we like working with the Rwandan government, so different case, because we're actually getting the government engaged, and we're doing a similar thing with a province in Canada at the moment. How did we engage them was actually to show how, by stepping away from all of this, okay, how is it going to get reimbursed, bureaucratic stuff, just forget that for a moment, right? Speak to the government and say, okay, we see that there is a problem in your country where there are, 50,000 people who are disabled, who do not have access to services. That is causing them a very low quality of life. But more importantly than that, it's very bad for your economy, right? Because by one person being disabled and not being able to be mobile, they don't have a job. Their family members have to look after them. Their healthcare costs are increasing. Their need for social benefits increases. Their unemployment, all of these things increase. So if you manage to reach a certain level within the government where they understand the big picture, you can get out of this question of small level cost reimbursement, and it becomes a question of the big picture. How do we do something that improves the country, the economy, and the population, right? That type of conversation ends up being a completely different conversation to the first level of, does the technical requirement of the product meet what it says on page 37, right? So getting to that point is difficult. You need to validate that you've been around also long enough, that your product is legitimate, that your company is legitimate, because why would a government actually talk with you and take you seriously, right? So that is, you need to be at that point, and you need to be able to be at the end of the linear sales process, in a sense, to the government, which is you've understood what they need. you've understood how to fine tune what you're saying and what the product is for their needs. You've tested it, validated it, etc. And now the governments are actually willing to buy it. So it's like a whole new level on top of what you've already done. Does that answer your question?
Yes, of course. Thanks so much. And I have another question. I'm Alice, by the way. Thank you for the lecture. You're brilliant, really. I'm really enjoying all this meeting. So I guess I have another question. So about recruiting people in the team, in your team, in the core team. Well, I see that you have a vision, and you are responsible for all this connection with the government and all. And I think you kind of responsible for the sales. Yes, am I right, or I'm not? Or you
I support the sales process, but I'm not directly responsible.
Okay. So what about recruiting? How you connect? How you get all these people to your team?
That's a very good question. Actually, that's a really excellent question. Let me think 1 second how best to answer that. The first, just the word that comes to mind, I will say first before I elaborate on an answer, honestly, is trust. Trust, I would say, in our team has been more important than raw, like, technical competence, right? It's very easy it's a lot easier to trust someone and be able to work with them effectively, and then they go off and learn the technical specialization, more so than it is to work with a technical expert who you don't trust and then figure out how to trust them. Does that make sense?
Yes, of course.
So especially in the initial stages, when you're growing your team and you're a small team, you need people who you trust, who you can work with, who become almost like family at a certain point, because especially in the initial phases of this. Oh, cool. Thank you. It's nice to see you.
Yeah.
It's you have to work very closely with people, and it may also involve, to be honest, understanding that on a particular day you have to work till 2 a.m. because you have to turn around something that needs to, for 8 the next morning, and you need to have like a shared understanding that you all want to do that together, right? So yes, you need the expertise, but first it starts with the trust. And I would say our team that we have now is basically the same core team that we started with. Our team's been with us for since 2014, basically.
14, wow.
Right.
That's a lot. It's almost 10 years. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a long way. Still all together. Wow.
And we're still all together, right? However, the few people where we actually broke our rule and took people for a raw technical expertise, but we didn't have the same feeling, they've left our team, or we fired them.
Okay.
Right. Mostly, to be honest, we fired them because, I'm sorry to say, but also there's the bad apple spoils the
whole tree. Yeah.
The whole tree. So you have to be very careful with that. So when you're in practice, how we ended up putting our team together, honestly, was actually in part through word of mouth. It was actually referrals. I have to admit, we have not had a big success just on CV-based hiring. We have had excellent success on, I have a friend who I trust, who knows someone who he trusts, who has some domain expertise in that field, and who he believes is a good and trustworthy person. So, there are different ways to do that. I would just say, from my experience, that is actually how it has gone most successfully so far.
Okay.
Do you have a particular challenge related to recruitment right now, or how's?
Well, I have experience with recruiting my friends for the job for my team.
Okay.
And I worked with a publishing house it's a small publishing house, children books,
Okay.
etc.
Yeah. All right.
So, and we have the similar situation where our core team was like 6 or 7 people, and we worked together almost 10 years. But well, yeah, sometimes our paths changed. So yeah.
No, understood. Yeah, it's a challenge either way, and equally, there's a sort of balance. Like sometimes it can be dangerous to work with too close a friend, because these things, in a way, like personally, even though I love all of our team and I'm like, I'm great friends with all of them, I would do anything for them, and I actually don't see our team outside of work hours as a general rule. Just to avoid that type of thing. So when we see each other, we're professional, we have a shared goal for what we need to do, and keep it simple like that. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for your advice.
If that's helpful, I don't know, but yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, if you want to discuss that separately, we can also discuss it. It's an interesting one. I mean, we also have challenges with that, and it's difficult when you have such an established team, bringing new people in, and not that they feel alienated, by not being part of the core team is also challenging. So that is it's an important topic. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, but I see it's important. So yes, if you want to discuss it separately, unfortunately, I'm not God, and I don't have the ultimate answer either, so I can't. But if it helps to discuss, be happy to.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah.
All right,
Cool.
thank you. Any other questions?
Good question.
If not, I'll just ask you to elaborate on something you started at the beginning, that you actually transferred knowledge and know-how from other industries that you've gained in these new. Actually, there are two very different businesses. One is the product per se, and the other one is the platform or the software, the services part. So how those transfers actually happened, because we started with part of the students. Actually, I invited some other students to join specifically for your for your talk, but before that we had 1.5 hours talking about technology transfer.
Oh, great.
And
Okay.
knowledge transfer, and that the informal, quite often informal knowledge transfer through people, through their previous experiences and so on, is even more important than the formal transfer through licenses and so on. So that's a good, although we didn't staged it, it was a good
Perfect.
it was a good like transition.
Yes.
So that's the first question that I would ask you. And then the second one is, maybe you can talk about the question of the services, because I think more or less you were talking more about the core product, and the actual scaling up is actually the platform that you develop, the software that you are selling to the clinics, that can have a quite large spillover effect. So the software can be in all the know-how that you've developed can be easily applied to other new medical products.
Absolutely.
So can you elaborate on the potential of using of your services to foster new product development?
Absolutely. That's a very good question, or set of questions. Yeah, knowledge transfer is a fascinating area. So sorry, I didn't realize also. So you already had a good dedicated session this morning. That's interesting. Informal knowledge transfer, yes, is critical. I mean, our business would not exist without informal knowledge transfer. I can say that categorically. It happens at every step in the process. The thinking that started our entire business in the first place was derived from a completely other field, actually. There's so much to say here. I need to think where to start, actually. Sorry. At a very abstract level, and not to get too philosophical, but it's like everything operates as metaphor. And once you've figured out a metaphor in one context, that metaphor tends to apply in very many ways in other contexts, right? But the same sort of metaphor applies. Does this make any sense, what I'm saying?
For me, yes, but I mean, don't forget I'm a philosopher by background. So,
True.
And by the way, metaphors. That was one of my first journey into the current like social marketing area. I was writing in 1988 an essay on the. Actually, it was 1989, but I started 1988. The language as a means of power. So
wow.
how the metaphors you're using, how they relate the power and how they manipulate the understanding and the interpretations and so on. So those things that I have read, I mean, that was primarily philosophy plus political philosophy, but later all those readings that I got were very relevant to the marketing.
Okay.
And of course to the propaganda that we're currently kind of suffering.
Yes.
But the metaphors, I mean,
interesting,
are really, really good technology for not only for the power, but for the explanation and for transferring meaning from one place to another place. Yes.
I'm going to write that down.
I don't know about the students, but I mean, for me, I mean, I entirely speak your language.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Okay. Then that's good. And that would be an area, if you're interested, because we were speaking separately about other topics, that might be an area that we could look at. Actually, that could be quite interesting.
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
if you're, I mean, what I described today in terms of a product development process, yes, it was sort of framed more in the context of the physical product development, but that exactly the same overall process was exactly how we developed the software solution, was exactly how we developed the platform, is exactly how we developed our network of manufacturing approaches. We understood that the need was that, well, we needed to be able to supply these within a short time frame all over the world. How do we define that need? How do we address it? How do we figure out that we've addressed it correctly? Exactly the same process and the same questions, in a sense, that were asked as part of the product development, I would say, apply in a very similar way to the service development, if you consider the service to be like a product. Equally, you know, if you take something like customer support when you have a business, customer support itself becomes like a product, right? And that same process of making sure that you meet the customer's needs and expectations, that you build the right systems, that you test that they work correctly, it more or less applies to everything you do in a sense, right? So the knowledge transfer, once you've done that in any field, to be honest, you can apply the same approach in many other areas. I have to admit, the thing that set me up the most to feel confident as an entrepreneur was an opportunity that I had when I was 15. And I was very lucky it was related to theatre, actually, because I had been involved, like, as a little kid, musicals, singing and dancing, all sorts of things like this. And because I and a few other people had been doing that, it was like every summer it was organized by a charity. They said, well, okay, we trust that you would be responsible now, so we would like to select you and one of your friends to direct and produce the show. What? So we were very lucky that we had that opportunity, actually, at the age of, well, no, even I was 14 at the time, geez. My friend was 15, that we had the opportunity to figure out, how do you develop something that meets the expectations of a lot of people? And we had a very fixed timeline, because we knew that today was May the 1st, and there's going to be a room with hopefully 400 people on it on September the 1st. So it forced us to have to figure out something that I didn't have the language for. I mean, I didn't understand that what we were doing was product development, but we, by kind of sheer necessity, had to figure out some of these things, had to understand that you don't do scene one super in detail for a month and then realize that you didn't actually spend any time on the rest of the show. We understood that you had to set in motion getting all the actors ready, but you also needed in parallel to set in motion things like the actors are going to need to wear costumes. We're going to need something on the stage. All of these were like separate parallel elements that needed to be developed and had to be able to come together, right? So handling that type of problem in any kind of domain honestly gives you the tools to do it in almost any other domain. That would be my personal, and you will pick up all sorts of things like this and from different people as you go along as well. So as you're doing product development, like have the coffee or the beer and listen to the guy who's explaining what he's doing in some completely unrelated field of marine biology and whatever, because chances are in marine biology, they figured out some kind of angle on essentially product development that you would never have thought of in your field. But chances are, if you take their learning point out of marine biology and apply it to what you're doing, wow, suddenly you have a massive explosion in growth. And actually, that was one of the things that we achieved as a company, which was our industry was so self-contained. It only hired people who would come up within the industry, that the industry couldn't see outside of itself. And we were, in a sense, some of the first people who just brought in new thinking. We brought in thinking from, blood management, medical devices, from theatre, from manufacturing for, 3D printing, essentially, which at that time we were looking at manufacturing for like custom consumer products. All of these various things came together to produce a very innovative company. But the parts, in many ways, were very simple.
Yeah, that reminds me something that I was kind of reflecting and trying to understand what's the difference between the current secondary education and the secondary education that I got. And one of the clear differences is that in recent years there are a lot less self-organization of students in terms of cultural events or opposition towards the teachers that was happening in 80s, even under the socialism. And even in a way, we had these political performances and so on. And all these political performances had a second hidden meaning. And we all kind of competed to kind of be critical at the same time, using the language of the system. And although, I mean, especially the theater example that you mentioned, we had at school, every year, every class had to participate in the festival of performances. That could be everything. I mean, it could be theater, it could be just a sketch, or anything that you kind of send a message. And all these people that at that time were kind of in a leadership role of any kind are currently entrepreneurs. That's really amazing that we can relate the same story. I mean, from say UK and the socialist Bulgaria, but and unfortunately, when I speak with my kids, even though my daughter is in arts, that they don't have this opportunity. Because the teachers don't believe them that they have the opportunity to stage something on their own, to create a choreography or something like this. And this kind of the opportunity that you got this responsibility at the age of 14 or 15 to create essentially a new product, is something that transfers along the years. Okay.
Absolutely. Then I would also certainly support the value of that.
The second question,
Sorry, no, I agree with you completely.
Yeah. Okay, maybe you can shortly comment on the second question, and unless there are other questions emerging right now, right? Colleagues, do you have any other questions? No. Okay.
No.
Maybe we close with your comments about the kind of like looking at the future, how your platform might be used to facilitate new product creation.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yes, that was right. I missed something. No, thank you. It's an interesting question. So actually, we faced it's a very interesting question. Let me think also where to start. We developed as a company in prosthetics, in part based on my experience as a double amputee and understanding that there was a clear need in prosthetics. So we developed this solution and this platform, and we're continuing to develop and do some quite interesting work with also some big corporates, including Toyota and BASF, also from a technology development perspective. So what is quite interesting is that these corporate companies have been attracted to us as a use case for a certain type of thinking, because in many ways, yes, we are actually one of the very few companies actually in the world who created a platform for understanding the human body needs, doing some processing, and returning a dedicated custom-made product. Right? That was actually something that basically hadn't really existed up until that point, or exists in a very like parameterized basic way, right? But not actual custom made. So we've actually had some very interesting conversations, because exactly the same technology and process and platform, I need to be careful what I say, but we're discussing for direct application for wheelchair seating. So this is still for wheelchair seating for orthotics, still in the kind of assistive technology field. But we've also been approached for questions of custom car seating, consumer products. We were approached and rejected the opportunity to get involved, to be honest, in quite a lot of military R&D. I won't go into that because we just didn't want to get into that field. So, yeah, the same platform and thinking can be used in very many ways. I think one of the things that, and it comes back to the knowledge transfer element, is like, often things that you do have very many applications, and you should keep in mind what those applications are as you're developing it, not that you make decisions that eliminate your ability to do other things later on. So there is a kind of a balance of find focus enough that you can achieve a product, that you can legitimize the fact that you know what you're doing, that whole system works. By the moment that you've achieved that, it has actually not been us reaching out to other people. It has been other people reaching out to us, asking how they could leverage and use our platform. So yeah, that's been very interesting so far. And I would like to say more, but I need to be a bit careful.
Yeah, I understand that. But sorry for that question.
No, it's a very good question.
Yeah. That also fits into what I'm planning to continue to do after the lecture.
Okay.
Because and I started actually with the case of Amazon, where you started with an online bookstore, online stationery, and then you actually developed a full service web cloud company that has nothing to do with selling products. They're already selling technology that was developed for internal use. So one of my kind of selling points of, say, today's lecture to my students is that they should have carefully assessing the products and the technologies behind them, so they can improve the technology, so they can sell the technologies instead of product.
True.
Because selling the technology behind the product can be a lot more beneficial, profitable, scalable, and so on and so forth. So that's the storyline that I started with the technology transfer as a means to enhance the innovation management and in a particular company. And obviously you can't develop all the technologies yourself, so you have to borrow through informally, and so on. And then at the end, when you're very good in producing a product with your own or mixed technology, then you kind of scale up this technology instead of and then from product from product development, we should start thinking about how we actually move to a platform economy.
Absolutely.
Because what's really happening these days is that we are developing new platforms that in the future, and I would say maybe that will change the economics as well, because the economics currently explains very well the supply and demand of products. But functioning of the platforms is something very different. So platforms, if we want to explain the platforms, we should borrow the language, the metaphors from the management perspective. So the platforms are much more organized organisms than the markets. But at the same time, platforms would have a lot of competing elements and so on. So what will happen from a theoretical perspective? Well, I think maybe I will not be the person to create that, but there will be a merging between economics and management in explaining how platforms develop. But like in 10 years, we'll be having much more platforms than currently.
Completely agree. Actually, can I just, when you say that, if you don't mind, can I just share 2 additional slides on my screen?
Sure. Yeah.
Sorry. That's fascinating. I completely agree with what you're saying. Sorry, I will just. And that's fascinating. My 1 second.
Okay. You already have a presentation on that, right?
Well, actually, not exactly. I have to admit, this is an area that actually is also a particular interest to my father.
Okay.
And it's something that, yes, to be fair, has informed. So coming back to the knowledge transfer, my father had worked as a consultant in many different industries, and so he is someone who has been very much of a knowledge transfer, applying thinking and moving from one industry to the other and cross-applying knowledge and things like this. He had developed a few slides about platform management, which he actually provided to me in advance of creating this presentation, and I had decided not to try to touch I mean, it's just quite limited. But the two examples that he gave that were quite interesting were, one was related to Lego. So actually Lego has kind of a basic platform of all the blocks and how they interact and how everything fits together, but they also have, let's say, differentiating models that serve specific purposes. And between the combination of the basic platform and the various special modules, they're actually, you can create everything from a town to a spaceship to anything you want. Right, and it might even be that the turret of that tower is also the nose of the rocket, for example.
Have you tried the Lego robots?
No, not yet. No, but it looks really interesting.
It's I mean, if you use this slide in the future, add Lego Mindstorm.
Okay. Yeah.
Because it's a very interesting product, by the way, designed in partnership with MIT, with university. Okay. So currently Lego robotics, or the learning how to program robots and how to create robots, you can do with Lego. So okay. I mean, a part of the normal Lego blocks, you can have sensors, motors, wow. And chipset to manage everything. So, and kids can learn to program in virtually no time, in just less than wow. Actually, when my kids were first grade, I think, my daughter started attending Lego classes, Lego robotics, because she was fascinated by a birthday party for 2 hours. The birthday party was kids were introduced to the concept of building a robot. So first grade, imagine, first grade. Wow. So you got Lego, you got computer code, a program. So you learn in 2 hours, you learn to program. And you make a strategy for sumo, like two robots trying to beat each other.
Yeah.
So you have to design a strategy for the robot, and so the robot who goes out of the circle kind of loses, right? So okay. the robot who stays in the circle wins. So for 2 hours, the kids learn to program, make a robot, play the game, and then debrief and so on. And of course, wow, all the kids started to learn the programming. So and it's also part of Lego family, and it's kind of fascinating way to
and that's like, and that's basically a 2-hour product development session, actually.
Yes.
Oh, fascinating. That sounds really great, actually. Yeah, that's impressive. Yeah, absolutely. No, that things like that. Oh, I wish I had that also as a kid. But
when you were first grade, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's really amazing. I mean, no, I agree with you. The platform logic is really critical. And maybe just to say and come back to what you're saying about licensing, we are actually facing a question. Also, we have been a product and service company. We have a philosophical question in front of us, which is other companies are asking us now, can we license your technology? Can we license and pay you to develop the platform for us? So we actually do have and we have done development for other companies in parallel. So we do have a question ahead of us, which is, do we want to remain a pure product and service company? Or do we potentially want to pivot to some extent to become a platform development company, actually? So no, it's very, and the trade-offs are interesting. To be fair, when you're dealing with a lot of customers, it's nice, but it's also quite challenging, right? When you're a company that has 3, 4, 5 customers, but each customer represents a considerable amount of money, you know, compared to one individual sale, you know, it's quite attractive from a business perspective. You know, the question is, what do you want to have to think about at night when you're staring up at the ceiling before falling asleep?
Okay, it's a good good metaphor to stop at, right? And to think and to reflect. The last chance for all of you to ask a question, leave a comment, or have a suggestion. Okay, so far so good. Thank you very much for again inspiring lecture. And we'll continue various topics of discussion and see what we can do together. And again, I'll invite you for other sessions to discuss, especially with some of the students that are actually developing their own businesses. And our MBA program is trying to support them, including through bringing risk financing.
Oh, great.
On the floor, and some of the students, I don't see them here, but some of the students are at very early stage where they would be just prototyping, testing the market, and so on. So always other innovative companies and entrepreneurs who were on the same path of problems would be beneficial to provide feedback. So invite you in these qualities. It's not just to provide a lecture, but just provide a feedback on several pitches.
Sure, I'll be happy to do that. Definitely.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's have a break, a lunch break, and we can meet at 1:45 for the remaining part of the lecture. Колеги, да направим почивка до 12:45. Не, всъщност до 1:40.